Mhm. Hello, judges and friends at the AM/PM transition, depending upon exactly where you are in the world. I thank you for coming today to participate in Project Hope, an investigation of projects and your relationship with them. This is a unique time that we are in, coming out of in various ways and also facing a new variant of a pandemic, um, after a transition to a new approach to judging through Judge Academy. And I think that this is the time, especially at a charity event like the one that Isaac King has put on. And I do believe if you are in the chat room, wonderful wild applause type gifts and comments would be appropriate to the entire staff for this experimental conference. Um, as you know, a lot of my presentations often start with thank yous, but fundamentally, I decided that really project work is essentially um, a kind of a group thank you that we give to one another. And so with that in mind, rather than have an elongated list of thank yous, I just want to jump right into the objectives for this presentation. We have a few. The first is to discover what judge projects are, and I say are not, but I actually really mean have not been for reasons that I think will become more obvious in a moment. And then I want to compare and contrast the long-lived projects that have proven the test of time versus projects that are not merely short-lived, although some are short-lived merely because that is the scope of them, but the ones that are short-lived and don't rise up to what the expectations or hope, Project Hope, if you will, that people had when they initiated those projects. And then we're going to learn what a 19th century economist knows about projects that you might not. And then we will explore what Judge Academy has planned for projects in 2021 and beyond. Yes, there is a plan. Yes, it's mostly not announced. No, this isn't an announcement, but I do have some inside track that I get to share, and I'm pleased about that. And then we're going to apply the you don't need permission, but you have mine if you want it principle for your next steps. And then finally, time permitting, because we have like 50 minutes together, time permitting, we can do some Q&A, or you can always reach out to me at my email at markmasonalerts@gmail.com. And it's my name, Mark Mason, and the word alerts, because it comes to my phone. So I get alerted that this is an email that has been sent. So first, what are judge projects? So historically, prior to the Judge Academy, projects have been an adjunct of the judge program to provide tools, services, training, spice of life even, to judges, by judges, for judges. There are projects that have at least some, or these projects, or many of those projects had an actual tacit endorsement, if you will, or lifeline cast to them by the program coordinators, or PCs as they were called back in the day. And even though there was this PC involvement or lifeline, not every project required implicit program coordinator endorsement. There was often this gray area of projects between sort of the formally authorized and the individually autonomous. And I think that some of that ambiguity has created the same space of confusion that maybe even persists to this day, and creates some roadblocks perhaps, or challenges around how to understand projects in a contemporaneous view within a Judge Academy world. Now, when you really talk about gray areas, here's a fantastic example. Something you may think is a project, but is in fact not a project, is JudgeCast. And JudgeCast looks and acts in ways that are completely consistent and congruent with the project we talk about. Round pegs into round holes, right? I mean, it looks exactly correct. However, it's different in a number of important ways. First, there was no program coordinator input. And importantly, specifically no direction on who was or could be a host of the show. And while in the judge program world where a judge could be suspended for various reasons, a suspension included or implied an inability to continue to do program work. If there were ever an event where, say, all the judges in Florida were, or many of the judges in Florida were all decertified at once, Judge Cast would be able to continue to go right on producing and podcasting. Also, if I've got some Meg Baum fans out there, Homeward Path is effectively, by all standards, a judge project, but it is not what would have been deemed a judge project within the standards and confines of a pre-Judge Academy judge program world. As Meg said, this is just something we did. Likewise, those city guides that you might have enjoyed when you were being staffed to events, and you would look at those city guides that would tell you, safety information, sites to go see, food options that were around or further if one wanted to venture. Those were non-official projects, if you will. So I like to throw out that this was one of the big surprises when I took on this project, if you will, of this judge conference, was I learned a lot about that transitional phase in the history of projects and how they really kind of began to take on a life of their own. And in that same way, I want to invite those of you who are here today, and then those of you who are watching the video in your own time, feel free to make comments in the bottom. I'll definitely check them out for a reasonable period of time. But if you'd like to see a list of example projects, you can still see a number of both the sort of official and the sort of autonomous and those directed projects at apps.magiccjudges.org/projects. But I'd like to hear from you. What are some projects that you know of or wish existed? Feel free to shout out into the chat room any of those things. If there are elements worth amplifying, I may do so. If you don't want me to repeat a comment you've said, please definitely put like no post or NP or something like that, so I don't shout it out. But as you're thinking about projects that you've seen or that you wish existed, that's something to keep in mind as we look forward and ultimately have even that objective of next steps, because maybe within the new understanding of projects, you're the one to bring that to life. So as you're thinking about that question, let's talk about objective number 2, those long-lived versus short-lived projects. And again, in this case, a short-lived project that met its goal, I'm going to consider long-lived, right? In this case, it's going to be, did the project survive to the vision of the project leaders? All right, well, not all projects are created equal, and you can see that in the survey results that we had, and conducted about just shy of 100 answers when it was all over. There are, of course, some selectivity bias because these are judges who are deeply invested into our online communities. They're not, say, somebody whose primary understanding of their role in judging is to be at their local game store, being the bedrock of the program, frankly, but generally isolated and not interested in all of the nuances of what Judge Program is. But that #1 survey answer about what led to a project thriving or not surviving was around matters of leadership. And L3 spoke to me even beyond the survey about how projects require leadership, the recruiting of others, motivating of those other people after recruitment. So it's not nearly enough to get them to say yes. And then doing the work when those others don't. Um, it's a delightful, almost slightly cynical take, but I think is absolutely core to what leadership looks like, right? The real leaders do inspire, do attract, do motivate people, and when the charisma isn't necessarily enough to get somebody across the line, they take care of it themselves. Let's see. So what I wanted to do here is have another opportunity for participation. Does anyone in the chat room want to mention the longest project they were involved in, and if they recognized any leadership or any of these other qualities I'm about to share? So here are some leadership styles that are out. And this reference is from, and I think I can do this too, so that Isaac doesn't have to try to catch. Yes, there we go. This is a distillation of some information on leadership styles from the Indeed.com website. And I want you to, as we're going through here, sort of identify what is leadership to you. Have you heard of or experienced any of these different leadership styles? Which did you like? Which did you find challenging? Maybe even what style is your own? Leadership is an L3 quality. But L3s aren't the only judge project managers, right? So anyone who wants to rise up either in level or in advancing or leadership of a project can be thinking about these leadership styles and how they might apply to you. So the first is the coach. The coach is a motivational style. They really seek to bring out the best in each of their team members. They truly believe in 360-degree feedback. That is to say, they want feedback to be delivered to you, and they want to take and receive the feedback from you as a team member they're leading. It's not one directional. It's not my way or the highway. It's how are we going to get there together? Correspondingly, delegation is effective through the coach type person and deliberate. They're making a conscious decision to delegate. And the focus of their leadership is to craft opportunities for the individual growth of the team members. Makes a lot of sense. If you almost think of it like a sports coach, this is the same approach to leadership. The second is the visionary. These are the charismatic, inspirational people. When you think about that goal of not only coming up with the project, but inspiring and recruiting people, that visionary leadership has that charisma, another one of those L3 qualities that can inspire and motivate people. They're typically innovative because they're often selling an idea that's far out of reach and getting other people to come on board and take risks along with them. The visionary leadership tends to upend conventions. These are the if it's working, you probably need to break it type thinkers who are innovating across all kinds of spaces. Our third leadership style is a servant. And this is the people first focused kind of leadership. They legitimately and actively care about their team. They are very consensus driven. It's interesting. I almost, in one sense, think of it as like almost the anti-leader, right? Like everything they do is leading from behind. It's leading from a position of if we didn't have to have a leader, how could I help you? How could I serve you? How could I make our goals as a team get better? And I thought one thing that was really interesting in the Indeed article was that these folk care about the whole person and not just the person as a cog in the project, as a person who produces labor. Again, I definitely want to encourage that link. And in case someone is listening just by audio, it's indeed.com/career-advice/10-development/common-leadership-styles. So hopefully I'll be able to make that as a comment on the recording wherever it's published for ease. Let's look at some more. So there's the autocrat. The autocrat is highly efficient and results focused. By the way, a lot of us, as we're thinking about these styles, will notice it's not so much that we're one and not the others, is that we are predominantly one or two, some, and predominantly disinclined to others. It's also worth pointing out, and for those who do kind of take the deep dive into the article, you'll see that even though some of these words might be words that are more jarring to us, or a word like servant may, immediately be thought of, well, that's not leadership at all. That's not what leaders do, right? Other words might be a little more alarming or sensitive in other ways, but all of these leadership styles do have strengths and weaknesses, and do, in the article, have specific well-known leaders that they have identified as having these particular approaches. So the autocrat is extremely efficient, results-oriented. They're very rules-oriented. So as you can probably imagine, there are certainly some judges that graph towards this, because some of us are already rules-oriented in our judging strengths. They highly value structure. And they believe in supervised workspaces. These are not the leave it alone zap type people. They're not ignoring you until there's a problem. They're very, very structured. Next, we have the hands-off. This is the constantly delegating leader. This is the leader who, if you want to think of it, they're sort of like the coach, but the difference is the coach really does sort of have your skills assessment in place on day one, and they're looking to raise you up out of this. The hands-off I tend to view as more like the farmer that's just throwing seeds, or maybe that's not what farmers do, but somebody who is just sort of scattering seeds to see where they grow, constantly throwing out opportunities, promoting that sort of workplace freedom and autonomy. And the thing that they do, while they are hands-off, they make sure the table is full of the resources that you need. You're not left on your own to even figure it out, but you are left on your own to do it with all of the relevant pieces here. So Misha said, I really like leaders who serve the team. If you like the idea, check out Simon Sinek. He had a TED Talk and published a few books about it. Yeah, and that is a good point also, I think tangential to what Misha is saying, which is this thing that I'm covering as a bullet point of my presentation could be itself a week-long seminar, much less a 50-minute overview. So we have the democratic leadership style. They are responsible focused. They really see themselves as meeting out really a democratic process. And as such, they value group discussions. They tend to be rational and flexible and swayed, if you will, by the intake of ideas. But one thing that's really interesting about the democratic approach is, even though there's this goal for sort of consensus, this leader does know how to make a decision when the attitudes and opinions have been fully explored and presented, and then they're ready to do it and get the team moving forward. Similarly, we have the pace setter. The pace setter is a leadership style that is related to horse racing. There are kickers, there are pace setters, and there are front runners. The pace setter is a highly competent leader. They are almost, in a sense, a leader by default. They are simply so good at what they do that others want to be around them. And the core strength that they have may not even be technically leadership, but it is technical skill that a good team member, just by not quite osmosis, but certainly by modeling and mentoring, can get. These tend to be goal-oriented. They are slower to praise because it's that mindset of, I'm sure you've heard people who are like, you don't get a pat on the back for doing what you're supposed to do, right? That's sort of where that style comes from. These folk, the pace setters, value results over soft skills. They're gonna love that you handle a customer service type oriented concern with competency and compassion. But if you did it after first getting the call wrong, they're going to be much more concerned about getting the call right in the first place. Your transformational leaders are really interesting. They're focused on the culture, and taking something from where it is to where it could be. They do encourage team. They tend to be big picture oriented. They, because they're interested in transformation, they have a deeper sense of like the non-tangible needs of the organization, be that the judge program, or even secondarily a project within the judge program. These are similar in my mind to the visionary, but the visionary has their model of what the future should look like, while the transformational has this sort of aspirational model of what the whole could look like. And then you have your transactional leaders, which are kind of interesting. These are the very incentive and contributional slash cost benefit analysis type leaders. They're very pragmatic. They tend to be your micromanagers. These can sometimes be the people who fall into the leave it alone zap kind of troublesome leadership style, where you're left alone until you don't do something right, then you're called out on it. These folk tend, by the way, not to question authority, whereas, as you can imagine, like transformational and visionary leaders often do. So here's a few more. We have the bureaucratic. The bureaucratic is very structured, very hierarchical. They do things by the book. They're also very likely to, because they do things by the book, do things with you side by side, because after all, this is how we do it, and this is how we explore and communicate how we do it, so future people do it the same way. We want everyone to produce the same output. And there's our 10 styles. And so I also put on there for you to be thinking about your favorite style. Ask yourself those questions. Which style do you prefer to work with, and why? And what's your style? Have you identified your style? Have you developed your style? Have you earned not only the say, I mean, like, we all know a petty bureaucrat, right? Somebody who merely follows the rules but doesn't understand them or their history, or merely throws obstacles in people's paths because you're in the wrong line at the wrong time, right? What is your style, and have you earned the positive qualities of those styles as well? Leadership, again, is an L3 quality. But as I like to say, L3s aren't the only leaders of judge projects or project managers, so be considerate of these things for yourself. I see some typing in the chat room. I am going to go ahead and pull up the slide for the next or for the next level of this analysis of the short-lived and long-lived projects. These are from survey results. I do want to say that where projects were named in a positive light, I often left the project name. Where projects or individuals were listed as the reason something didn't survive, I have edited out those names. I didn't want, any shade to be thrown on people, especially people who may not be here. Let's see. I've heard, but they only care about you because they want to use you. And my response is, if they treat me well enough to use me for the next 50 years, I don't really mind. Yeah, again, the how we interact with these different leadership styles when they challenge us is especially important, but being able to have the flexible attitude that Misha is purporting shows that we really can be responsible for even how we interact with a leader. So here were some other differences. Judge Anniversaries was a project that was long-lived, and this survey answerer felt that it survived the test of time, no pun intended, because it had a clearly defined mission, a project scope, and they had a schedule, quite literally, right? But they also had the schedule of their own breakdown of work. But you were able to realize that this week or this month, we're going to be looking at what the anniversaries are. They tended to focus on those big numbers, as we often do, but also making sure that nobody's judge anniversary went by without recognition. Exemplar had repeated defined goals to it. The USA North area captains had regular meetings and a defined goal as a unit. So again, we see this idea of making sure that the project has a clear scope, that it has a clear outcome, and that sometimes the work of projects is the busy work of meetings around producing the work of the project. Don't be afraid of those things. Unnamed project leaders and members felt rewarded and recognized for their work. In this case, it's not that I deleted the name. I just wasn't told the name. But this person pointed out that when project leaders and members are getting recognition for their contributions, that can contribute to the long-livedness or the short-livedness of a project. And then the level redefinition project was long-term, both because of the scope. So again, we have, in this case, it wasn't long-lived because it had a clear scope. It was long-lived because its scope took a long time. And then outside delays, such as the judge lawsuits. So that was really interesting, because I was sort of, when I formed the survey, like in my mind, I had the idea of like long-livedness just generally being a positive, but it is also true that like a project can grow well beyond the time that it required because of outside obstacles or agitations. So here was something about a short-lived project. A short-lived project just didn't really have usefulness. Now, again, I pulled out projects that people named, but I'm happy to name projects that I was a leader on that didn't fail. One was I was attempting to get a better understanding about how we used games and stuff in teams, and so I had created a bingo game that allowed judges to, while they were out on the floor, see if they can fill in the bingo card. This project didn't end up going anywhere, mostly because it was in that case, I think the scope of the project I made too small. I made it about this very specific game, and if you didn't like that game or understand it, then you didn't find it useful. If I would have maybe made the project about great team building exercises in general, that would have been a much more appropriate scope. People got bored after a while. This has absolutely happened to projects that I tried to be a part of. And then there were a lot of one-off projects. So this is that other idea that short-livedness doesn't necessarily mean it failed, right? There are a lot of one-off projects that did their thing and were done. L3 renewal, role selection for advancement roles, etc. We had a number of those that did their thing for like 3 months, closed up shop when they were done. And then this is, again, I want you to mentally put an asterisk because I'm going to talk a little bit about this perspective, maybe challenge it. So Judge Academy taking over killed all projects with no more recognition foils. No one wants to do free work for a for-profit company. So again, your participation is desired. But first, let's address the next two objectives that will tie into the discussion. I'm sure it's already brewing in the chat room, though, especially with that provocative comment about Judge Academy. But before we jump into that, let's find out what this person knows about projects that you may not. Vilfredo Pareto is a 19th century economist and philosopher. In studying Italian income distribution, he found that 80% of Italy's wealth was concentrated in 20% of its population. This sort of asymmetric or Pareto distribution it can be found in many places, not just in areas of economic wealth concentration. I did get a lot of feedback from Isaac on this presentation, and the one piece of feedback that I got, and I am choosing to ignore, perhaps at my own peril, is I do want to make a disclaimer about this fellow a little later in the discussion. If you already know, you know. But one of the things that was really interesting is he focused on the science of economies and was one of the first people to do that. Prior to that, really, economics was almost an adjunct of moral philosophy. If you think about like the invisible hand, that's a moral philosophical proposition rather than a sort of scientifically rigorous one. But here's some of the other places where you could find Pareto distributions. The size of human settlements. There are few cities, many hamlets and villages. File size distribution of internet traffic. Hard disk drive error rates. So like 80% of the errors will happen during 20% of the drive uses. The standardized price returns on individual stocks. Sizes of sand particles. The size of meteorites. The amount of time a user on stream will spend playing different games. Some games get played a lot, other games almost not at all or never. In electric utility distribution, 80% of the consumer minutes that are interrupted occur on 20% of the days of a given year. And yeah, thank you. We got a Kershew Adam Smith in the chat room. And perhaps again, notably, the project work appears to have an 80-20, and I do emphasize appears to. 1/3 of the judges to 2/3 do effectively or carry 2/3 of the project work. Further, in talking to project leaders themselves and digging deeper, and that was one of the joys of putting together this presentation, was talking to other project managers and leaders. It's often within the organization itself. Say if there were 10 people on the staff, 2 of them really do the heavy lifting of the whole project, and the others are essential. Understand that last 20% is sometimes what gets you across the finish line. But in terms of the actual workload, there's this asymmetry. Further, there are some projects where inputs and outputs are more evenly distributed. However, with both very small and somewhat large projects, there appears to be an asymmetry within the project itself. Consider a project like Feed the Klan. The workload was small enough that no real one person seemed to do it all. But there was still this asymmetry in that the project work reached people who depended upon it. Like there's lots of people who came to eat who didn't participate in setting up a place for people to eat. So there ended up still being it. I did mention that that this data came from, it has a certain selectivity bias because it's with engaged players, but also in L3 rightly pointed out that the judge program historically and even contemporaneously in Judge Academy is a bit hierarchical. There will always be a small number of L3s and a large base, and ought to be a large base of local judges with the ability to run local tournaments and even venture into competitive, but not even necessarily to do so. And by that very nature, and because at a particular time program work was a requirement of both advancement and maintenance of L3s, that there was sort of this built-in structural reason we might have seen this Pareto principle. Even more of the data is and even more, this apparent 2/3, 1/3 is a bit noisy, because I had an example of a respondent who said, yes, they were involved in judge projects because they had a Judge Apps account. Likewise, there was somebody who had received exemplar tokens and exemplar foils, and thus believed they were a part of a project. I think Isaac had said it really well by saying some people didn't differentiate participation in a project as a producer from participation in a project as a recipient of that work. This is kind of how projects are, right? That 80-20 shift even goes into working. But the good news is, when we're a team together, we all get to celebrate, even if we are the person producing the smallest amount of the work. Because again, all of that work is needed to get across the finish line. I've seen this in some of my own projects and with the time that I spent on Rules Guru. Some people do the most of the work. I believe from my conversations, it is still the case that Toby has generated the most question reviews or original questions, or perhaps both, of any person on that team. And it still remains true even while kind of on a sabbatical from that project. I was also a person who was recognized as having contributed a fair amount, definitely my asymmetric amount. And when we talked about what made that difference, what made me a contributor that kind of went past the test of time, is some of the things we talked about. Isaac set a schedule for me, or allowed me to set a schedule quite literally. I wanted to do one question a day on weekdays. We worked that out. Tools were automated, so I automatically received my question. And interestingly, even within a successful project itself, like rulesguru.net, there's still that question of people staying excited and not being burned out and not getting bored with the project. One of the things that Isaac has done is put the project on a 3-month rotating cycle, because that's nearing or approximating a time when a number of people have their excitement apex and then drop down. Some people, of course, re-up and get excited again because there's a new set, there's new questions to explore. But for some people, that's a nice off-ramp. And having talked about these ways in which asymmetry seemed to exist within projects, I promised that I would make a point about Vilfredo Pareto, and that is, because he was actually the first person to kind of popularize the word elites. He just happened to like them, and he was a fan of Mussolini and fascism because he thought this was a great way to get results. And I just like to point out, unlike the fascist idea that there's Jewish science or this or that, we take information from wherever it comes, and if a good idea comes from a crap person, we still want to have the good idea. I suspect that Hank will be in the room absolutely applauding me for calling out the fascists, but taking what we can get. So let's explore projects in a Judge Academy world. This is the two worlds we had. We had the Wizards of the Coast kind of subsumed, pseudo-distanced relationship from judging, and then we had Judge Academy. So remember that comment about Judge Academy taking over and killing all projects with no recognition foils. No one wants to do work for free for a for-profit company. Well, my opinion of that take is that it was a sincere take that person had, but kind of suffered from a post hoc fallacy, or simply thinking that because something came before projects seemed to stop, that must be the thing that had caused it. But from my perspective, Wizards dropping the judge program did a lot more to kill projects. And frankly, Judge Academy merely walked into that void and kind of inherited a system and a culture that probably never really worked authentically or appropriately, and that those cracks in the system and risks that are part of the reasons Wizards distance themselves from judging in totality. Some of those risks were now needing to be managed and juggled in a different way, and they would be imprudent to ignore. But as such, I think Judge Academy has gotten an unfair take, if you will, or read, because of just their position on the timeline. Now, I say that as I think somebody who I think most people know I'm more than willing to be a vocal critic of Judge Academy where I deem it. So I'm not a Judge Academy stan, but I do think that this claim was incorrect. Then on top of that, even after coming at this weird place, Visa Wizards, they immediately were thrust into a global pandemic that is still in effect and has, I think rightfully by their good decision of leadership to stop dues, has choked and cut off funding. So at the same time that it's attempting to cover up these cracks of a sort of volunteer adjunct for-profit relationship, while they're trying to cover that, they don't even have the revenue that I'm sure they modeled based on. And very importantly, and through conversations directly with Judge Academy representatives, Judge Academy does not want you to work for them for free. And they do want to encourage your projects. Projects can absolutely happen even right now. Judge Academy will set up forums where your project can have a specific subforum created for it. You just have to ask them. They are working on additional tools as well to better handle the support of projects on their website and otherwise. And the projects are going to be a significant part of what they're considering their relaunch, their post-COVID relaunch that's coming soon. Now, there will be projects that will not be supported in any case. And those are projects that are, one, using sensitive information people may or may not have agreed to share. Two, legally problematic or risky judge projects where a judge is basically taking on the liability, implicit or explicit, or are otherwise subjecting other judges to having their judge income brought into question. So think of things like the Judge Conduct Committee. I don't know if that, again, that was technically a project or not, but that activity is an activity that Judge Academy would not be looking to have as a project or similarly. And then three, things that were or should have been Wizards or Judge Academies in this case's responsibility, like translating official MTG documents. Judges were doing that as project work. So now when documents are translated, they're being translated out of Wizards of the Coast budget for translation. Judge Academy is going to be doing similar things. If it's something they need, like test questions, there's not going to be a project to write test questions. That's going to be a paid for activity because Judge Academy needs that work and they're not there to have you work for them for free. So I hope that if I've done nothing else, thank you, got the warning. I hope that if I've done nothing else, I have at least dispelled this myth that Judge Academy wants you to work for free. And as far as without recognition, that part is as true as it is. I have a personal belief that something is coming around the corner, and I'll just be transparent. I think there's a reason that two of the what should be judge foils this year aren't being accounted for. I don't know if that means exactly what we understand exemplar to be, but I suspect we're going to see that there's some sort of recognition system coming, but they don't want you to work for free. And I think we can find other non-dollar compensations to support one another, and I encourage that. Now, this is the you don't need permission discussion. Even if Judge Academy didn't want to support your project, you don't need their permission. You don't need anyone's permission to do what you love. You should just do it. Or in other words, you don't need anyone's permission to be awesome. You really can start doing projects right now. You can identify things that you feel would be important to make a team effort. Further, now that there's less program leadership, that blend where you almost have an imprimatur from the program coordinators that has to reach a threshold, projects like Homeward Bound, or non-projects like Homeward Bound, can be what we all understand and agree upon as projects in this Judge Academy universe. You don't need anybody's permission. You can be like Meg and say, we just need this, and we're just doing it. You don't need anyone's permission to be awesome. However, sometimes I know it's great to have permission. So if you're a person, and I'm looking right at you, but if you're a person who desires permission, you have mine, and you have Rainbow Dashes. Your project idea is awesome, and your being the project leader will make it 20% cooler. And we all know that asymmetry, that 20%, really, really matters. Alternatively, so are other people's projects. Their ideas are awesome too. And you don't have to be a project leader to be integral to project work. You can be a part of other people's projects. And if you could allow me a little self-interest and give Rainbow Dash a chance to relax, I would like to invite you to come chill with us. I'm a huge fan of rulesguru.net, but I'm also directly the current carrier of the torch for Rules Day. What had been historically Rules Day Tuesday is now being rebranded as Rules Day Live. We have a Rules Day server on the Discord at this Discord link that I'm also posting in the chat room. We are going to have this Tuesday our second attempt at the transition to a Discord used space. Come chill with us, come grow with us. We're learning how to do it and do it better. And be a part of helping the project by sharing the Discord link with other judges. It can be as small as that action that really makes you an important part of this project. Who knows, you may enjoy yourself and learn so much you want to join the team, which is currently recruiting for several different team roles. Either way, your next step should be clear. Decide if project activities is something you want to do, and if so, join an existing one, find like-minded judges for a new one, or take the reins and be a leader of your own project today. And with that, I just want to review our objectives. Misha, the presentation will be Tuesday, but that's our next one, and it's going to be on Adventures of the Forgotten Realms relevant stuff. So here were our objectives. Let's see how we did. We discovered what judge projects were more than, if you will, and were not, and what they are now. We compared and contrast our long-lived versus short-lived projects with a focus on leadership. We learned what the 19th century economist Villarejo Pareto knows about projects, and that is that often most of the work is done by few of the people. And then we explored what Judge Academy has planned for projects in 2021. And then we applied the you don't need permission, but you have mine if you would like it, principles to apply next steps to go ahead and consider project work at that time. And with that, I'm going to open it up for questions in the chat room, and I'm going to stop the recording. That's going to be my belief, so that if you guys, if somebody wants to come off of chat, they can. Give me a second to stop the recording now.